how identity is formed is something that mental psychologists, sociologists, psychiatrists have all considered, and in the book I do short forays into each of those attempts to try and understand things. But really what I wanted to do was approach it as a neuroscientist. And as a neuroscientist, we start inevitably with the brain cells themselves. And when you're born with pretty much all the brain cells you'll ever have. But it is the growth of the connections between the brain cells that accounts for the growth of the brain after birth. So even if you're a clone that's an identical twin, you're going to have a unique configuration of brain cell connections because these are forged by your unique experiences. So I would be quite unashamed to say, and I hope this doesn't upset people, that when a child is born, when they're very young, they don't have an identity. They don't have a fully formed identity in the sense that you will have by the time you've really realised your birthright as a human being of having these associations and connections, personalising your brain. And what really troubles me is if, unusually as we are today, living in a world where for the first time things can unhappen. If you're playing a computer game, someone can be undead. This reversibility, this living in the moment, means that actions no longer have consequences, so you don't necessarily have the continuing life story that has characterised human beings up until now. And I think if we could see old age as the culmination of being human, not where you're decaying, not where you're going out to grass, but the apotheosis of your individuality, because it's after all the culmination of your lifetime experiences. You've never been more you when you're old than before. That's how I see it, and that's how I think we should start to think about it in society. What neuroscience can do is to understand in the brain these different modes of living in the here and now, being very excited, having a high emotion, such as with the screen, as opposed to following through a chapter, a story, the story of your life, where actions have consequences. One thing leads to something else, and I think neuroscience can help us in these different modes. In particular, we know that the chemical dopamine underscores high arousal and emotion and reward and addiction. And in a recent study that's just come out, was even reported in the general press, it's been shown that people who are doing a high degree of gaming have an enlarged area of the brain called the ventral striatum, which is one of the places where lots of dopamine is released and where drugs of addiction are targeting. Now, of course, when you see this enlarged area, you don't know whether people who happen to have this enlarged area are predisposed to playing games. I suspect the opposite, that it's, given the plasticity of the brain, that if you're playing games a lot, it will exercise and rehearse and grow that area. So you have a much higher levels of dopamine, and along with that, the propensity for high arousal, you're more excited, you're more easily distracted, you have a shorter attention span, and you're addicted to the here and now of the moment. So these are the kind of insights that neuroscience can give you, and of course that does impact on how you see yourself, because my own view, especially in the moment, is if in this unprecedented way people are living for large hours, large amounts of their time in a world where you don't have a past and a future, you are just in the moment, you are connected, that this could have profound implications on how humans think and therefore what kind of society we're going to have. Another aspect of identity is empathy, as well as how you see yourself. And again, one has to look at trends, and I know they're just trends, and I know this isn't showing a causality, but given time and a modest budget, I'm sure epidemiologists could start to explore trends in the same way as they did in the 1950s when people first started out to look at the difference between smoking, the increase in smoking and cancer, for example. At the time, the mantra of the tobacco companies was there's no evidence, there's no evidence. And there wasn't, but there was grounds for trying to get evidence, and indeed it was eventually shown there was a causal link. And I think that one could have a comparable situation here, that it was reported recently in 1,400 college students there was a decline in empathy over the last 30 years, particularly accelerated in the last 10. To me, that's a rather eerie coincidence with the rise of the digital natives over the last 10 years. Now, I would be the first to say that doesn't prove it, but surely we should be looking into this. And you think about it, there would be a rationale. We know that eye contact and body language and voice tone and physical contact are very important in interpersonal communication. We know they're skills that you have to learn. We also know these are not available on Facebook. Where are those events that make you the person that you are, which no one else has done, that makes you unique? And I think if you're living in this world constantly of being blurred around the edges with others, then we might have eroded notions of identity. This is something that pervades all aspects, like climate change does, of our daily life, perhaps even more so. So I've coined the phrase mind change, which I think is appropriately neutral, So what we're going to do with this. Now, what mind change could do is to shape an environment, to give us scenarios, to give us possibilities, as never before, to realise our potential en masse as unique individual human beings, as never before. We've never had that opportunity. My mum dodged bombs in the Blitz. She wouldn't have worried about her identity or fulfilling herself. She just wanted to live and survive. For many people, that is sadly still the case. For us, that's not the case. We're going back to those old questions. Who am I? Who am I? What does it all mean? What do I mean? Why is my life meaningless? Or how can I make it meaningful? And I think that what mind change can do is to rescue us from the lure, and it would be that, of fundamentalist extreme ideologies which promise a meaning, promise permanence, albeit collectively, at the expense of your individuality, or consumerism, which promise individuality but don't deliver, as you find your neighbour has the same trainers as you and is as individual as you are, and you have this arms race of identity. Mind change, if it's handled properly, if we all work together, we could, and we're imaginative, we could design for our kids, for the first time, a place where they could really stretch themselves to their true potential. That's our challenge. That's what mind change is, as opposed to sitting glassy-eyed in front of a two-dimensional environment, having only your hearing and vision stimulated, going yak and wow and yak and wow. Wouldn't that have let down the ancient Greeks? Wouldn't they have been disappointed in us in trying to realise what humans are all about? Now, why an essay is different, even in medicine, which is what I was teaching, is that it does require you to have a lengthy argument, a train of thought where you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And why I think an essay, because it is concise and much leaner than a book, it doesn't require you to do exhaustive literature reviews. It doesn't require you to set out the story in a parallel way. It really does focus on a clear argument, a clear thesis that you're setting out, where, as when you're an undergraduate and you have to refine all the existing literature into a relatively short essay. So the challenge was to actually be lean and mean and clean in the very argument that I wanted to use. This wasn't a coffee table book that was going to set out every single thing that was known about identity from all aspects. It was where I was using other disciplines to try and look for what they could offer and what they didn't. For me as a neuroscientist, to actually come up with some kind of original thought process as to what identity could be.